You can access the entire episode now on our website, forbiddenknowledge.news, Rokfin, Rumble, and all podcast platforms. I want to try and cover a few different types of mysterious cryptids and creatures, but first and foremost, let's get to Bigfoot. I want to get some of your insights into the phenomena that surrounds a lot of the Bigfoot sightings. First of all, do you think that there is paranormal aspects to Bigfoots, things that we currently can't explain that could be explained by consciousness abilities or metaphysical understandings on the behalf of the Bigfoot?
Good question. It comes up a lot lately. I don't know. I mean, I've taken a lot of reports over the years. I've talked to a lot of eyewitnesses. It's probably a few hundred at this point. Not all of them are credible. You know, some have sightings that are better than others. Like there's a category of sightings, in my opinion, that are, just in my own personal view, better sightings because maybe there was more of a closer view or there was some kind of an interaction there that really, it's not just seeing a fleeting glimpse of, oh, I saw something 200 yards away that just dashed through the tree line. I mean, that could really be anything, right? So the better sightings are interesting because it makes you wonder, what did these people actually experience? There's not really anything they could explain it away as. But that being said, majority, like, I'm never good with the statistics on this, but at least probably 90-95% of the reports I've taken and people I've talked to, there don't seem to be any weird aspects to it. I mean, obviously seeing some kind of 8-foot-tall ape-like creature in the woods is not really normal to most people, right? So in itself, that is a weird proposition, but there haven't been other, like the most common types of sightings and encounters that I've come across are road crossings. So they see something dart in front of the car. I mean, you could see any animal dart in front of the car, right? That's kind of a given with wildlife. So there's nothing really inherently that unusual about that. And then people in camps or out in the wilderness that have things coming into their camps, maybe messing with them, throwing rocks, wood knocks, whooping, a lot of the supposed associated behaviors. So there haven't really been weird aspects, but there are minority reports that involve maybe like orbs and stuff like that. Now, I don't discount that. I know some people do. Some people think it strictly has to fit into the way they view the topic. I don't necessarily discount that, but I definitely think statistically speaking, in my experience, it's not the majority of reports. Now, I don't know if that has to do with maybe people are scared of reporting the weirder aspects. Maybe there's an element of that. I think, honestly, most of these people have such quick and fleeting sightings, and that's kind of seems to be the MO with a lot of this Sasquatch stuff, is that it just sort of, it's trying to get away from you. There's not a lot of interaction to be really expected. So I don't know what's going on. I mean, I lean more towards Sasquatch being some sort of undiscovered hominid or hominin, something probably closer to humans that is clearly more intelligent than even some of the other great apes that exist, but not like an undiscovered gorilla species or anything like that. I think we would have found something like that a long time ago. But yeah, like I said, there are definitely weirder stories, and I'm not going to discount those. I have plenty of people that I've interviewed that have truly strange things that have happened in association with potential Sasquatch activity. So I can't discount that. I don't know what to do with it. I mean, what do you do with a lot of these other reports anyway, right? It's because what I find interesting about it is when you get a bunch of sightings is you start seeing patterns. You know, where are the sightings happening? Are there consistent behaviors? Somebody in Washington is telling me the same thing as somebody in northern Maine, yet these people have no way of interacting. And especially if their reports happen pre-internet era, how would they at the same time congruently be able to make up behavioral details that seem pretty consistent, that once you start kind of adding up the reports, you get consistencies that speak to traits with behavior. So for example, human beings, doesn't matter where you go, which continent we live on, we live all over the place. We're still social animals, we're still technically primates, right? We have a lot of the same traits and characteristics, even though we may live in completely different environments and all over the world, but humans are pretty predictable. So you start seeing that with some of these Sasquatch reports where there's very consistent behavioral type stuff. And that is really interesting because that's indicative of some kind of species. There's some kind of consistency again there. And I think, I don't want to explain away some of the weirder aspects of it. I think, again, people have their experiences, and there are certainly weirder things out there. I don't think Sasquatch is the only strange thing out there. I've had a UFO sighting in Pennsylvania. It was hands down the strangest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, do I necessarily think that was in that moment connected to Bigfoot activity in the area? I didn't experience any Bigfoot activity, so I can't say. There's multiple things going on. If you see a deer in the woods run through and then you see an orb, do you associate that deer with being paranormal? So there may be multiple things going on. I again don't want to say, my eggs are not all in one basket, right? I could be totally wrong. I'd love to be proven wrong I'd love to be proven right either way. Whatever happens is interesting to me. But
Yeah.
I think what's interesting too with some of the Sasquatch stuff is a lot of people I've talked to, there's this like adrenaline dump that happens. There's even people who have PTSD residual. So, if it's a traumatic experience, you're out in the woods hunting maybe, and you're vulnerable, and you have something so large and massive as has been described by some eyewitnesses that people never want to go hunt again, or it takes them years just to go back to that spot. They clearly experienced something, but I think humans, we're chemical animals, right? We have all these kind of things going on in our body, and certain situations, traumatic, adrenaline, stress, they can change your perception. And then there's also maybe things that we just can't even see, because I think a lot of the stuff perhaps that's described as paranormal is just, it's paranormal. So maybe we'll understand it in years to come. One area of interest is infrasound. That's something that you can't see infrasound. You can't feel it. You can't touch it. You can't analyze it in a laboratory. It's like a radio frequency. If you try to go back 200-300 years and explain cell phone technology to somebody, they'll probably burn you at the stake for being a witch or a wizard. And it's that kind of stuff is hard to understand. Infrasound is frequencies, and a lot of animals, more and more, we're learning, use infrasound either to communicate or some kind of way to kind of map their landscape in a way that works with their senses, which differ. And I recently read an article by some researchers who spent an extended amount of time with mountain gorillas in the Congo in Africa, and describing, they believe that the male gorillas can produce infrasonic vocalizations that have an effect on female gorillas, which is really interesting, because for years I've heard of stories of people saying, this Sasquatch vocalized at me, it roared at me, and I felt the vibrations in my chest. I felt stunned. People call it being zapped. Infrasound is it's very unknown. I don't know a whole lot about it. I just know, I know people personally. Like, I have a friend who had an encounter in northern New Hampshire in the mountains where he saw a hand pressing up against his tent and rubbing along it, thinking, what is this? And then here's this vocalization that he said he could feel in his chest. And I've heard that time and time again. And now, this is something that's been reported for years, and then turns out very recently there's possible evidence that gorillas produce infrasonic vocalizations, which would mean they're one of the first large primates that produces infrasonic vocalizations. So that's really interesting, because we have a number of these ape behaviors that we now know about exist in gorillas and chimps and orangutans that were previously reported in Bigfoot encounters. For the past 150, 200 years, you have stories of the smell, of course, Sasquatch smell, right, and odor, and that's only reported in a less than half of the reports I've taken have an odor associated with it. It's usually a wet dog smell. It's a rotting meat smell. I've heard multiple times people describe it smells like the monkey house at the zoo when you go visit primates. These are very consistently pop up in some of the people I've talked to across North America. And gorillas can actually control their scent glands when they're angry or agitated. It's like if you could control your BO to make somebody uncomfortable, that's what gorillas really do. That's like a defense mechanism. And it's interesting because not all Sasquatch reports have the smell aspect, which to me indicates, if something is living in the woods, it's going to take on a musk, right? A lot of animals, bears certainly smell when you run into them in the woods. That's pretty consistent. Whereas with these Sasquatch reports, it's only present in certain amount of encounters. And I've even heard of some encounters where the smell sort of lingered for a while and then vanished. So I don't know what's going on there, but I'd love to do more research on some of the gorilla stuff with the scent glands, because again, I'm not saying that I think the Sasquatch, whatever they are like an undiscovered type of gorilla. Clearly, if you look at the footprints, and somebody like Dr. Jeff Meldrum probably more suited to speak on this, or maybe Cliff Barrickman, or somebody who's studied the hundreds of foot casts, they clearly look like a larger human footprint, right? If you look at footprints of gorillas or chimps, they have that divergent big toe that's almost like a thumb. They'll have their foot looks like almost like a modified human hand.